So let's crack on into topic one. Now, the really important thing with regards to master attribute files, and this was obviously a query raised by Jeff as a topic last time. Now, master attribute files are really, really important. And I think that to kind of get context to this, I'd like to kind of suggest that, first of all, you actually go back and watch this informative session that was delivered by Scott Moore as part of Archi Intensive 2023 on the dark side of attribute chaos and Archicad. Now, what this demonstrates is that there's this underlying challenge within Archicad with regards to index numbers. So index numbers are a really, really kind of challenging thing to work with within Archicad. And in the sense that if you don't have everything aligned with index numbers, you can end up with a situation where by just going through and muting people as they come in, I probably should have set up a thing so that it forces people to mute. I'll just fix that. Wonderful. It means that when you're in a situation, where you're kind of trying to manage projects with multiple files, or the challenges that you face when you copy and paste from another project, you experience this challenge whereby, due to the fact that index numbers aren't matching up, you end up with duplicate. You end up with duplicate. Trying to unmute everyone and mute everyone at the same time. Sorry, apologies for this. You find there's a scenario where index numbers don't match and there's all sorts of problems. So Scott's presentation in that demonstrates how challenging that is, okay? And the reason why someone would want a master attribute file. Sorry that took so long to get out, but there were so many people dropping into the event at the time. All right, so there's two approaches to this, and there's two ways in which we can address this. And first of all, you can actually have master attribute files. Basically, you can just have it within your own template. So the first approach that I recommend is actually build your template with all of the attributes that you need. Now, that's the recommendation I'd make for everyone, just as a fundamental approach to things. Now, the problem is that there could be a situation where you have too many. Now, that is something that I guess is a situation where I look at my past practice where I worked with Fulton Trotter, and we had over 3,500 building materials and surfaces. And if that's the case, you have way too many. Now, that's kind of taking the approach, obviously, of a template and how you handle it. You know, first of all, you might want to have a template, but then if there's too many, you then have a situation where if there's too many, you might want to build your master attribute file. Now, there's two ways in which we can handle that, right? We can handle that either as a practice-based attribute file. Now, and by doing that as a practice-based approach, what you end up with is a scenario where all of the index numbers on all of your attributes across all of your projects will be consistent. Now, what does this enable? This enables you as an organization to be able to copy and paste any information you have from one file to another. Now, I don't know how often you have been in a situation where you've copied and pasted information between files before and seen what occurs. There's some really good examples where people have demonstrated how a master GDL object can essentially mess up your whole Archicad template process. But then, you know, once again, there might be instances where you're working on major projects. So say, for example, you're working on a project that is $100 million, and you have, multiple files that need to hot link into one another, and you might want to run a master attribute file just for that project rather than based on practices. Now, I can be honest and say to you that basically the approach that I've taken most of the time, or my whole career, has been where I have a practice-based attribute file for lines, pens, fills, surfaces, building materials. But then what would happen is that you would then use on a specific project, you would have custom composites and complex profiles. So what that would mean is that each individual project would have their own composites and own individual complex profiles. And then if you were to work in a scenario whereby you wanted to, in a large project, the approach that we take with that would be to use the site file as the main master attribute file. And then from that site file would then need to populate all of essentially the building files, or we could call them children. So that's kind of the approach that I've taken. It'd be really interesting to know if there's anyone else. There's a few heavy hitters here from Australia and New Zealand on the call, I can see. So it'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are. But what I might do is I'll switch over to a clean file, and I will share that screen. Okay, so right now we have a clean screen. This is Archicad out of the box, and I'm going to go into our attribute manager. Now, the problem might be my file might be running slightly slow, mainly because I have about half a dozen Archicads open and a few other things as well. So this is our international out of the box file as we get it. There could be a whole session alone in regards to how to build your own template with relation to out of the box. Building from out of the box and not killing all of the information that's required for, all of the, objects and railings and curtain walls and all that sort of stuff. So that's really important to understand. So in this methodology now, there's two methods that Graphisoft have introduced. So this is the traditional way of working in Attribute Manager. Graphisoft have introduced this methodology in Archicad 26. I'm still not a fan of this. I can't work this way yet, but there is the ability to import and export attributes from this process. So for example, we can come into here, and I'm just going to use my template at the moment here. And the problem is that I can't see how these all line up, which makes it very, very difficult for me to be able to kind of see these things side by side. So they do have the ability to individually kind of go through and adjust these things. You can select them one by one. We can go through and select multiple, but once again, it's not really a kind of a neat way of working. And they are working on it. They are kind of working in the background to try and make that workflow and user interface a lot easier to work with. But going back to the old school method, and I guess this is the way I kind of think about it. Now, the key thing is that as an organization, I think the most important thing is that I would highly recommend, unless you are a little bit different, like Fulton Trotter, where we had thousands and thousands and thousands, would be to build your layer combinations, pens, line types, fills, surfaces, and building materials all into your practice template. I don't know if there'd be anyone else out there that probably has the level of kind of need to build them into their own projects. I don't know. I'd be interested to know if anyone wants to put that information in the chat. But then the idea would be is that I end up then using the complex profiles and composites to be project specific workflows. Now, one of the things that could be really, really critical is, say, for example, you're in the mass housing market. So you're not an architect, but you're a mass home builder. The actual approach I would actually say for those guys would actually be to build individual composites and complex profiles with their unique identifier, and then just continue to build on that. Because then what that means is that essentially you're building types for all your composites and complex profiles, which then can be used by your estimation team and the like, and quantifying and all that sort of stuff. So they're kind of, I guess, some of the kind of key things I think that I suggest would be the best approach to start the ball rolling. But say, for example, we have a project here whereby I want to bring in my master. This is my template, or this is my project, and then I want to bring in my my master attribute list, which just say, for example, now the interesting challenge we have now also with all the different file types. So we used to be able to import a few other different types in the past, but now it's reduced a little bit. Used to be able to bring in, I can't remember what it was. Ironically, it didn't appear, and then it did appear. So let's just assume this is a project that I'm currently working on, and this is a file that I need to bring in my new attributes into. Everyone's really quiet today. No one's on the microphone, or sorry, no one's on the chat talking about how they do it. But what you'll see here is that I need to bring in some of these additional line types. So this, just say this is my master, and the recommendation I have for people with managing their master attribute files would be to save them, keep them as a PLN file. Keep them as a PLN file. If it's project specific, make sure it's one of the actual files you're using, because otherwise it means you're maintaining over and over and over too many files. But what you want to do is make sure that, you know, once again, go back and watch Scott's video. But I always bring in things by index. Number one rule is always bring in things by index. Now, what we'll see here is I've got hidden 01. So what I did here is I need to go back and say, oh, look, 21's hidden. I've renamed this in my template. So let's go once again by index. And then we'll see 39. And let's go back in here and bring this in by index. So then that's tidied that up. Now, the sad thing is I can tell by this file what's happened here. These are two line types that are snuck in. And even this one here, these three have snuck in via a site survey. So remember, every time you bring in a DWG file, that DWG file actually brings in with it line types as well. So you got to be very careful of that in terms of bringing those in. Now, the methodology I have here is I have all of these. This is my master template, and in this template here, I've got 614. Not as bad as it used to be. And I can see here that this has even gotten in a position whereby I've got some duplicates because I brought them in from separate things. So you can see here I've got a mess. But the key thing to remember is that, once again, this is another thing where you want to make sure that all of your fills, they could be named differently, but they represent what similar things if you're going to overwrite the existing ones out of the box. It's good to see Chris has commented, Damien's commented as well. So Damien's commented, use a PLN to store attributes and not ATT files. Yep, that's exactly the right approach. And Chris has talked about having his attributes contained within the template, and then take them to develop a project-specific template where you take the attributes that are not relevant. Works better for us to take out than add in. Store them in BIM Cloud. Permissions create available to managers. Yep. The reason why I don't do it in BIM Cloud, one of the tricks we had at Fulton Trotter was that it was actually saved on a server drive where people didn't actually have access to certain people didn't have access to modify. They could access it to see it, but they couldn't access it to edit it. And that's a key thing for, I guess, for people that probably aren't using BIM Cloud themselves, which is really important. A lot of people even store their templates on BIM Cloud. I kind of find I use BIM Cloud as a last resort. I always try and keep projects as a standalone file as a starting point. Don't always try and push them into BIM Cloud straight away. And Melina talks about having fake attributes named end of template attribute as the last attribute for every type. Way it makes it clear what's added. That's really clever. I guess that would be good. And then Chris, I guess the challenge would be if you use, say, Melina's workflow of actually having a attribute saying at the end, if you delete out attributes that aren't used, then you'd end up with holes in your index list, which then what happens is when you bring in attributes, they just append into those next available index number, which could cause some challenges for you. So I'd be very, very careful with that approach, because if you have those gaps, it'll be very hard to find those new attributes that you've added in. Ashwin's talked about, hi, we've had this issue from where past projects, because of poor quality objects or 500 odd attributes get copied over. This is everything. Yep. All right. So Ashwin, a really good suggestion here. So this is actually a process I actually use with IFC files. And I think what we could do is probably talk about that in that IFC section when we talk about that, in terms of actually how we cleanse and filter a file before we bring it in. Ashwin, the thing you're probably talking about is probably the master GDL, and the master GDL is, let me just say, it's the kind of one of the worst viruses that Archicad could essentially have within it. And Dylan talks fake attribute index is easy to audit. Yep. And Damien's talked about, I've discovered an issue with the conversion of names to XML. In the XML, it converts the attribute name to a file path. So any attributes named using special characters, Archicad must convert this to typically an underscore. So try not to name attributes using any kind of special characters, as it could be mistaken as a file path. Yeah, Melina's taken the rule not to delete. Do not rename template attributes. 100% perfect. Jeff, I don't know if I've covered off well enough on this at a high level. I think the really important thing to note would be to, I guess, remember that there's two ways of handling it. There's the practice level and the project level. My suggestion for most is if it is possible to have all of those within your practice template. Obviously, if you have a template as insane as we did at Fulton Trotter, then the approach would definitely not to be to do that, because you have too many attributes in your file to do that. One cool thing, I guess, is, but I haven't really, the reason why I'm not kind of presenting on Archicad 27 today is because I don't know whether or not technically we're allowed to kind of demonstrate in 27 yet. So I'm not doing it, but the technology preview is actually available right now. So I strongly recommend everyone that's on the call today to actually jump onto the Graphisoft website and nominate to actually get access to that technology preview. There's some really, really good features in there. And specifically, I kind of mean with that is that there's the ability for now search functionality, which I think is, it makes having longer attribute lists really easy, specifically if you have really good naming conventions. And I think that's really important. So naming conventions for your attributes are really, really important, because everything you create essentially then has some meaning to it. So what we'll do is we'll go back over to our PowerPoint. And Jeff's commented that was reassuring he's thinking along the correct path. That's great to hear. I'm glad that that's what you were thinking already, Jeff. But the thing is that the challenge is that there's so many ways of doing it. And the key thing is that for everyone here, I couldn't recommend enough to go and watch that presentation that Scott did. It's something that we recognized over a decade ago. So hence why we built a crazy index-based template that had all of those in place. Edgar's talked about. We've also got a QA attribute as mentioned by Milena at the top, at the end of each attribute, for example, ID 1000 QA. Yep. That's a really good suggestion. That's a clever tip for everyone today. So on to topic 2, and model collaboration. And there was a couple of queries raised or requests made in the last meeting with regards to that. So today I'm going to share with you a workflow I developed probably a decade ago, whereby this is kind of the collaboration process that I set up at Fulton Trotter to talk about how we start the modeling process, how we start the collaboration process with people that part of our team. Okay, technology. Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So first of all, we're going to talk about the collaboration process. So what's the steps that you need to take in the modeling process? The second part we're going to talk about is geolocation and the importance of that. The third part I want to talk about is the reference model methodology. And this is obviously important where we have elements that both, there's two parties that need to be, need access or want that model in their documentation. Element ownership, which is really important. So first of all, the most important thing, and this is one thing I hear happens on a lot of projects, and I still don't understand why people can't get this right. I hear lots of feedback from people within the industry saying they're having struggles with people that they're working with in Archicad and geolocating projects. Now, I'm going to be selfish here and say that the architect needs to manage the model collaboration process. So as the principal consultant, typically, you need to take charge. You need to actually set the actual location of the file up. So what you need to do at the start of the project is create a project template or a project file. Now, the minimum requirements in that file is to have your project information, your site terrain, site boundary, building grids, and then stories at the correct levels. Okay, so yes, it's early days, but no one else in the team really should be even anywhere touching a model until your stories are kind of set to a certain point. Then what you want to do is publish that project to IFC. Now, what that actually does is that provides every person in the team the geographic location and orientation for the project for every other consultant to follow. So that's the most important thing to remember. You are setting the actual location of the project for everyone to work off. Then you transmit that to your whole consultant team. So then when the consultant team receives that information, they open it up in their software of choice. Then they create a project template file based upon that. So there's lots of conversations around engineers wanting additional levels in Revit to basically document their projects. But the fundamental is they need to be working with a file that is set up with the correct story settings for a project. No matter what, they shouldn't be adding additional stories into the project. They should be just taking different reference levels or views, and there might be better terminology that's Revit based that I'm not aware of. Then what you want them to do is insert one element on each story at a different grid junction. And then they need to note down the locations of these elements that they've placed and include that in a transmittal to an architect, back to us as the architect. Create the IFC file, then transmit it back to us. Then what we need to do is review and confirm that the consultant template has been exported, that it is totally coordinated. So what we're wanting to check here is the site level. We're trying to check the site orientation, the site position, and also the story positions, because all of those are critical as a foundation for any other team member starting to model. Obviously, there's a yes or no position at this, where if the template fails, if they fail, you advise them where they failed and then send it back to them, and then they get to do it again. Then if it's correct, then you can move on to the next step. So let's jump over to this one here. So what I've done here, now, normally the workflow that I approach with site locations on all projects is to take a site boundary, and I normally take the southwestern corner of a site, and I'll take that and I'll place that as my, well, you know, if I'm being lazy and I'm not doing right, that's normally my 0, 0 for all projects, because 99% of the time, every single element within that file is then moved, is essentially a positive from the X and Y. In this instance, obviously we have here is some negative Y, but I've positioned this slightly differently, and you'll ask why. Now you can see here my site's sitting here relevant to 0, 0, and I'll take off my copy. Now, when I got a detail survey done of this site, the surveyor has put in place a temporary benchmark sitting right here. So that temporary benchmark is the place where a surveyor will come back to when they go to sit out the site. So that becomes a project's local surveying point. Now, most situations, and I say most, and then we'll get on to some of the challenges that have been raised by the community in a minute. But 99% of the time, that's the best approach to doing these things. So temporary benchmark, it's a known surveying point, and the surveyor will double check that is correct, because hopefully the same surveyor that's done this set out will do that. Okay, so let's just delete that out of the way. So now we've got that in place. North is always up. North, it has to always be up. If you've got a building on a slight angle, utilize the ability to set your orientation to do your modeling, so that you're not modeling on awkward angles, and you're modeling to 89.9 degrees or something like that. But all the time, always have north up. So then that's never going to fail. You always want to have that orientation correct. So what are the things I've done here? First thing I've done is obviously located the site based upon a temporary benchmark. The second thing I've done is put the site in place. And what I want to do is I've obviously got my grids here based upon the existing build. Then I want to go in and set my story set. Pardon me. I want to go in and set my story settings. So I've set my story settings accordingly. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can do, obviously, set up levels within Archicad. But the approach I've always taken, even when I've got projects at 540 meters above sea level, is to always have a site story where its elevation is based upon RL's relative levels here in Australia of 0. Therefore, your first floor level, whether it be a basement or what have you, is to the first level. Then you set out all of your stories accordingly. Okay, so we've done that. Now, I'll get on to the questions that I see coming through in a second. Now, the most important thing you want to do is we want to go into each story. And at the moment, I've just placed and I put on an Archicad layer. But what you need to do is that if you do not have elements on each individual story, what will happen is that when you export to IFC, so we go back into our 3D, and at the moment I've got my grid, and I have one on ground floor, one on first floor, and one on roof story. So what I've done here is if I don't put one of those on each of the floors, that floor won't export into IFC. Now, let's just do this as an example. I'll just take that floor off, and I'll just do this for a bit of fun. And I'm just going to say that, let's just say the entire project, just for the sake of no, and I'll call this no roof, and we'll export. Now, I haven't touched the translators at all, and that's another conversation for later today. But so now we've got an export. Now, the other things that really are really important is to actually populate project info, and I haven't really populated this fully. There needs to be obviously a lot more information that needs to go in here to assist in populating all of the relevant information that goes out in the IFC. So before I move on, I'll jump back into the comments. Blair says, yes, origin set to temporary benchmark. Excellent choice. Damien, agree, set primary accessible and logical site, set out TBM at 00 and AHD or local datum. And Chris says the main issue we have with importing IFCs from Revit-based consultants is their levels are not classified correctly with Revit before they export. They classify a level as a building story, it is exported within their IFC. If it's not, it doesn't come through. They need to get this corrected their end for it to work. This is a tick box in Revit. So the key thing is if you're experiencing those challenges, just have the conversation. Nothing's better than having a conversation. And that's why I think it's really, really important to have the conversation before people start modeling. So it's planning before you do. It's kind of like that measure twice and cut once type approach, right? And it's that conversation where they set that up right at the start of the project. Damien says they normally call story 0 AHD and set another negative story for site content. What if you place the same grid system on each story? Andreas, that's a really interesting comment. The reason I guess I don't do that is because I end up with duplicates. And I really don't want to try and end up with duplicate grids. So that's something that I'm trying to avoid. So let's see what happens when we open up Celebri, and I'll just change my screen to Celebri. And the key thing to note is obviously our IFC tree. For those that aren't familiar with IFC, that was the file name. This is the site name. This was our building name. And these are all our stories. So for some reason, the grid hasn't appeared in this IFC file. I've got to try and dig down into why that hasn't happened. And for some reason, I have a gut feel it's to do with the translator as to why it hasn't come out. And that's something I haven't been able to kind of test before this. But let's close this model. And hopefully it's going to be like a little bit quicker. Oh, apologies for that. The screen share dropped out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the IFC workflow no roof file. And I will share the screen of that once that comes up. Just adjusting some things. All right. So Rowan said turn on the 2D plan. 2D, where are those suckers? Floor plan lines on Celebri. I can't even remember where they are. It's been that long since I've used it properly. Oh, there they are. Okay, so remember this is the second file we saved off. Okay. Now, oh, the roof actually came through. Oh, it's funny, you know, because I remembered doing this several years ago with John Mitchell here in Australia. And Archicad, even when you sent the entire project, the roof story wouldn't come out. But what I want to suggest is that you put in some element into here that people can connect to. All right. So have the same issues every IFC. Yeah, Chris talks about, yeah, we get the right with the initial IFC template, but there's always new stories creeping back in. The key thing being is that if it's just that monitoring approach, right? So always auditing models before they come in, and even to the point of kind of suggesting to people that they audit their own models before they send them to you. They should be able to see and do a kind of a check against what they've sent you. But it's exciting to see that Archicad now exports all the stories that come through. Now, I'm losing track of my times, but Moyes talks agree a lot of the projects don't have geolocation as part of the fee proposal and gets asked towards the end of the project phase. And then David asked about pros and cons of set Project North. Project North, if you set it north, every single project, it's a consistent way. Every time someone jumps in one of your projects from your office, they know exactly what they're working with. That's the reason why I do it. It means that there's no kind of changes. It's always the same. And then the only thing that ever occurs is the orientation change. So Moyes raises an interesting point regarding geolocation becomes something that happens later. So let's take a step back, right? So at the moment, we actually have geolocation, which is a site-based geolocation for this project. But let's pretend that we didn't get a site-based geolocation. There wasn't a temporary benchmark provided by our surveyor. And let's put our file back up here at 00. Now, there's this magical new tool that Graphisoft have added a few releases ago called the survey point. Okay. And what we can do with the survey point is come in and adjust our survey point and change it to an odd location. Now, I think this should work because I typically don't do this, but Scott, I guess further to your question, and I don't know how much testing you've done on this regarding geolocation, but the thought process that I have is that within Archicad, you would work to a known point, right? So the key thing is with geolocation, you need to have been advised a known point of the site with its eastings and northings, or it's actually MGA grid here in Australia. Thing is, if you get given an MGA location, it's not going to give you the actual location because it could be anywhere on the site. You actually need the actual a specific known point and its specific eastings and northings or what have you, depending upon what you're working on. And once you've received that information, you can move that survey point to the known location. And let's move this again back to where it was. I've undone all my deletions. So our known point for our survey mark is our temporary benchmark. Now, what we would want from our surveyor would be the precise eastings and northings and elevation of that point. Now, you got to be careful with that because if you insert any elevation on that that's different to your site, it will then elevate it and change it based upon that. But then once we've done that and we've done our eastings and northings, we can come into our IFC translator. Now, this is what I was talking about before. The out-of-the-box translator is reasonable for an average user, but if you really want to get into actually doing really more accurate IFC exports for your clients or what have you, you will start to adjust some of these things. So, for example, you will get into your type mapping and you'll change your classification systems. It won't be the same as the one that's out of the box from Archicad. Your geometry conversions, which is where right here under geometry conversions, you'll see define IFC model position by survey point and not project origin. So you can see here, you place in those details here and advise that. That's how you can do it, or you can just go project origin only. And that's typically the approach I will use for the majority of projects that I work on, as I said before, where I don't have a client requiring geolocation. And all right, now we're getting some good comments coming through. Damien says, yep, you got to adjust the translator, which is correct. Blair says all the geolocation info should be documented in a BIM execution plan. Certainly should be. But it also should be documented what part of the site or what point of the site should be actually documented on the site survey as well. So Scott's talked about inputting the eastings and northings as negative values from the permanent survey mark, and the survey point moved about 6,000 kilometers away. We brought that into Celebri, and the permanent bench was showing the correct eastings and northings. That's what it should be. That's what it should be. It should move it to be where it actually is located. And I'm hoping I understood that right, Scott. And then Damon says the best way is set up a consultant file where you create the reference points and module lists in your main master file as context. And that's a really important point. And that kind of moves on to, I guess, the kind of next kind of component of the conversation, in the sense whereby you have a situation where you have how we actually do this collaboration file and how we're actually collaborating overall as a team. So imagine we got our geolocation right. And now we want to move over to when we're actually modeling together. So once you get that initial model right yourself, you then obviously then would build up your model to be suitable level to then coordinate and collaborate with your consultants. Then once we've done that, you then publish that to IFC, and then you include all of the relevant construction elements. And the key thing with this is to, when you're sending IFC files out to your consultant team, is to essentially send only the information that's needed to collaborate. Do not send any more. Okay, you send anything more, it slows everything down. Then they will receive it, and then they'll deal with it from their end. They'll then model what they need to model and then send it back. And then the idea is then you'll end up in a coordination loop where you then end up coordinating with one another. And then hopefully get to a point that you're fully coordinated to the lines of what you've been required to under your BIM execution plan, and then your model's ready to issue for tender. Now, the key thing is to know from today is that we could talk about IFC collaboration all day. It's actually probably a topic that requires all day, and it might be something we might come back to in the future, because there's just so much that we could go on about. But the key thing, I guess, and I'll just turn off this share for a minute. The key thing, I guess, from my perspective to kind of learn from this, and it comes back to a comment, and I guess the quick thing is I might just, before we move on to this, Milena talks, even if easting northing it's not specifically nominated as point, I get it by placing coordinate object in the survey drawing file. Yep. 100%. It's exactly right. I think I've picked up all of the comments. Edgar, it's quite important to put the survey point on a layer that doesn't show any different packages. So the positive is that it's actually not on a layer, Edgar. I'll just jump back in quickly into this document here. This little magic thing here actually turns on and off. So it's actually not actually something that sits on a layer itself. Okay. So just something, a little tip for you to know. And the thing is, you can put that survey point based on a temporary benchmark and known spot based upon where your site is. Okay. So further to your comments or questions, Scott, regarding elements that where you have also yourself and another participant that's responsible for the element. And Blair asked, when do they change the visibility? Must have been 26. As I personally haven't used that workflow methodology because we haven't had many asset owners that need to geolocate their projects. So moving on to, I guess, Scott's comment with regards to, say, for example, we have structural elements like a column or beams. And we, as the architect, are modeling them at the start, then the engineer goes away and models them as well. Can there be a situation where, only one party is actually responsible for it? At this point in time, I think the position I take is that I still believe that there has to be some waste and both parties need to model it. The reason why I say that is because we're not advanced enough whereby as an industry, we're ready to kind of trust that whole thing where an individual party can, where we're going to collaboratively work together to model one element and have all the information in it that both parties need. So for example, a structural engineer we'd model a column first as the architect, saying this is where we indicate where we'd like it to be. And then the engineer would then go and take our design model and then actually then model it up themselves. And then I'd then see them as actually confirming the size and positioning that they're going to have from performing as a structural perspective. I'd then take that model back from the structural engineer and then make any adjustments I need to make to my model. Because the reason being is that I need to, as the architect, specify any specific finishes that I need to apply to that element, or any kind of, basically it's a finish-based approach for the architect and dimensionally setting out. So you'll find that an engineer actually doesn't dimensionally set out their structure. They rely on the architect to actually set out their structure. So, and then the structural engineering, then is a situation where the structural engineer needs to document in their process as well. So the information that's in our model actually is irrelevant to them. So, Scott, I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for specifically. But I think at this stage, it's still the maturity. And I know there's workflows that Graphisoft have in place with engineers working in models with the other architects. I can't do that yet either. I don't trust the process. I don't trust anyone in there doing those things. So that's kind of, I guess, something that I've kind of parked. But I know that doesn't really kind of give you a favorable answer in terms of trying to lessen the load on those things. But it's the approach that I guess I take still at this point in time. Now we're running short on time because we're nearly running out. So I'm going to go as fast as I can now on the topic 3. So one of the things that I think, and this is this quick segment actually won't be on YouTube, guys. This is one of the process I set up recently to, yeah, I know. Some people, it'd be good to see in the comments, Scott, whether or not people think that there's any other better practice. You could come up with a really good model element author plan where you kind of can share things and share elements, and then people put the right information in, and then you can copy that information out. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. All right. So this one won't appear on YouTube. This thing's a process I developed recently. As people that have taken the time out of their day to attend this, you get to benefit from it. Okay. So thanks very much to that. So how often are you finding yourself in a situation where you have multiple methods of tracking your issues? People have meetings with their clients. People have all these different emails that come backwards and forwards, right? From my perspective, that's really a poor method of managing and tracking issues. There's also file storage solutions and transmitting information. Now, some practices have expensive methodologies of doing this because they're larger practices. But what about small practice? How do you do this as a small practice? A client portal, a single point of truth. So a place where your clients can log in and get information on the project at any time on any device. And I guess one of the challenges with that is that, yes, once again, you could have an expensive website built for you where you have client portals set up with all of their documents and all that on there. But once again, what happens if you don't have that money? What happens if you can't afford that? And what happens if you're not a person that can't code things? You're not a computer scientist. You also want to have access control. So people actually that only are entitled to be in that project can get into that project. That's kind of the foundation of what I've created. So the workflow I'm going to show you very, very quickly today is involving 2 tools, Notion and Airtable. Really cool features. Notion, I actually personally believe I've used it for my conferences in the past where I actually have the content for attendees to download or access during the event. Really good pages for wikis. Actually, I personally think that we should all transition our information delivery documents, and I call it information delivery guides instead of CAB manuals, because I think, or BIM manuals, I think they're outdated in terms of terms. We all generate information. I actually strongly recommend Notion. It's actually a really cool platform to work on. And then Airtable, because it's database based rather than Excel based. All right, so let's do this very, 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 very quickly. Okay, let's do a new share for us. And while we're doing this, I'd be really keen to hear whether or not other people that are on the call do something similar. So we're in Notion. I've created a page here. called Client Portal. Put a pretty picture of their client, of their project up there. I can share it with them and bring them in. I can upload videos. And what I've done is I've taken a client portal that I've created and actually stripped it all out. Okay. So I've stripped this all out so I can protect the privacy of the clients. So I have a Vimeo site that I use for my client, that I have my client videos. They're all private. And then I embed them here on this site. So the client can come here and see their concept design video that I made for them. Now, sending emails or drawings, sometimes drawing files, 30, 40 meg. Notion enables you to actually save files up here. So I actually can save PDFs right here on this page, and a client can click on it and download it off an Amazon web server. Obviously, people that are working with practices that are or clients that require data sovereignty, this wouldn't be something you'd be able to do, because there wouldn't be guarantees that this would be the 100% secure from that data sovereignty perspective, but it is secured behind a share portal. I also then drag and drop old drawing sets. So basically you can move these anywhere you want. So what you do is you'd upload a drawing set, which I can do here, and I can go file, and I can upload a file, whatever file I want. And then I drag the old files down into superseded, doing the same with BIMX and doing the same with Enscape. Okay, so that's kind of the base of essentially it's a common data environment for your clients. Now, this could also be kind of specced up where you could then also bring in your consultants, and you can interact in a similar manner on the project. So you could have a project with a client portal and a consultant portal where you can drop and drag and drop files from everywhere on it. The second piece of the puzzle, which is I think the really kind of neat thing, is because this is a client portal, I can come in here and write an issue. I am not happy with this design. Then they can say, I want more. They can actually attach files. And I'm just going to submit that. So basically I can do this. This is just an Airtable form. And then I'll come down here, and what happens is I get an email straight away notifying me that there's a change. What I'll do here is I'm just going to run an update on Notion. And what you're going to see here is that the register automatically updates. So then I'm going to go into Airtable, and all this is a simple thing. Now see it's populated. That normally has the date received in automatically, but then I've set up a status or an option, and I'm going to investigate it. And then once I've finished investigating it, I can put comments in here. Once again, put that into Airtable. The client can come in back into this portal and then see that. Now, the idea is that all these changes I've accepted, incorporated into the design. So this here is a live feed of issues. Now, on major projects or larger projects, this here could be that you could have a view, which is the entire issue register, but then you could also have a filter. So here I've set up the issue register. Then you can actually filter it so that it's excluding all of the accepted ones. But in here's the form. So Airtable obviously has its base database, then different views to create. So we've got the issue note, that's then what's set and embedded into Notion, and then a register to track. So out of time, I've got to run to another meeting, guys. Sorry I didn't have as much time to go through it as I would have hoped. But I hope that you found all of that stuff of great value today. Anyone that needs any help within their practice with regards to setting anything up or working on their processes, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to assist. All right, guys, have a great day, have a great week, and we'll catch you again soon.